Hello, my name is Isaac Chapman, and I am in ninth grade and live in Addy, Washington. In my research, I have been learning recently that a minimum wage can economically force businesses to avoid hiring those with disabilities or less experience. Do you think that if we removed minimum wage, it would enable business owners to hire more diversely at a lower cost?
Thank you for the question, Isaac. I actually think that we need to make sure that we keep the minimum wage and, in fact, raise the wage so that we have family wages. We're in a state where the cost of living is very high. I don't think that we should eliminate the minimum wage in order to hire more diversely. I think we need to make sure that we have the minimum wage so we can hire fairly and ensure that folks are getting a fair wage. Right now, we have sub-minimum wage for folks with intellectual developmental disabilities, and they should get the same wage for doing the same work. Just like you would get the same wage for doing the same work as your colleague right next to you, that is something that we need to make sure that we do for everyone and make it equal for everyone.
Isaac, this is another great question, and haven't had any softballs here. They've all been pretty controversial and deep as to their answer. So your question is a great one about the function of a minimum wage. And yes, to your point, a number of disabilities community advocates and young people's advocates have complained that as you raise the minimum wage up in our state, you start cutting off some people who, for various reasons, either because they want to work part-time or they're very young or they're disabled, will accept a lower wage so that they have work to do. In fact, it's a little counterintuitive that whenever these minimum wage increase bills are proposed, disabilities advocates say, wait a minute, we have people who work part-time and like working part-time, and they don't necessarily need a high minimum wage. Keep a lower minimum wage so they can work on terms that work for them, and they're not usually working to support a family or anything. They're working for the sense of value in work and for some pocket money. And if you raise that minimum up too high, companies can't afford to hire our people, and they get cut out. They got no job. And Isaac, that gets to a great issue on the question generally of minimum wage. The great economist Milton Friedman once said, ultimately, the minimum wage is zero. Because if you raise the minimum wage up too high, companies do stop hiring people, and people who might want an entry-level job or a training-level wage, that's not available to them, and they're not hired at all. So we have to be careful where we set the minimum wage. When minimum wage laws were started decades ago, they were never conceived of as like a living wage, as the kind of pay that you could raise a family on. They were considered an entry-level wage, again, for young workers, for people just out of school, as a way to get into the workforce, to get into a job, and then the theory is, as you get more experience and get more skills, your wage increases. And many companies are set up to do that. They have a stair-step process where employees who've been with the firm for a while are paid more and more as they get seniority and get additional skills. There's been a change of notion of what minimum wage is. Right now, there are many advocates for a high minimum wage who say that the minimum wage has to be a wage that a person could raise a family on, could have a house or an apartment, get a car, send kids to school. And that is not how the minimum wage was originally conceived. So there's some tension in Olympia and all around the country, really, on this issue. I just go back to that economist. If you raise the minimum wage too high, you end up cutting entry-level workers who are working part-time, and yes, workers with some disabilities who work part-time. You're cutting them out of working at all, and we don't want to do that. So there have been proposals that, as we raise the minimum wage up, that we would have a separate wage for training wage or for people new to the workforce. But ultimately, I think we need to calibrate it. We need to mark it so that the wage is fair, but not so high that it pushes entry-level workers out of the workplace.